Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. The board had a work session and then a brief executive session to discuss matters of litigation. So I need a motion to reopen the public meeting at 7:13. All in favor? And we already did the pledge, so you missed that. And we get to just keep moving along. So I need to get the right page up for myself. So first up is just the president's report. People know my standard practice is to start with some gratitude from what's been happening across the district. I wanted to express appreciation on behalf of the board for everybody that recognized the board for all of its work, the lovely gifts that we got, thanking you for the thank yous. And then also, people may or may not know that it's senior week this week, and I know Mr. Block is in the background there, but senior athletes are being recognized at various events throughout the week. The parents make a lot of effort to support those athletes, and we make a big deal out of it, as we should, because our athletes put a lot of time into participating in our sports and leading their teams, and just want to appreciate all the effort that goes into expressing our appreciation for all that those students have achieved out there on the field. On the agenda tonight, we have a piece about the literacy work that's been happening. So we'll be hearing from Dr. Peace about that. And we have a First Amendment update as well, and then mostly usual business. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ackerman.
Thank you. And let me just wait for my slideshow to be pulled up here. Okay. All right. So the first thing I wanted to share with the board is that on the agenda tonight, we have an agreement with the town of Newcastle around the digital sign and how we'll be operating that moving forward. And we've been working on this for quite a bit of time. So I'm pleased to present this to you tonight for your consideration. And I met with our attorney and Vicki Tipp and Jill Shapiro and their attorney team, and Josh. Were you there, Josh? Okay, yes. And so and so I think we're in a good place to be able to support this joint venture moving forward. So I want to thank everyone for their efforts. And then thank you to, we had only about 5 people, maybe 5 or so people email us about our draft First Amendment policy, and then the policy committee met again to talk about that, and we discussed whether or not we should continue it in its current form or we should change it to a regulation. And so not many people are aware of this, but for some of our board policies, they're accompanied with regulations on how the district will see those policies through. And so we talked about, because in considering some of the feedback around the language around having a First Amendment policy and how that didn't sound or feel right, and then knowing that we can't really go into our code of conduct at this point of the year based on some regulatory language around how that is formed and the process in place to make sure that there's a hearing and students know what the rules are at the start of the year. We decided that we would look at this in terms of adding it as a regulation this year to one of our policies that are already in place. And the board has a policy 725 about how we maintain public order on school property. And so we made very few changes to it. We changed the name. We made some changes, slight language around capitalization and based on some feedback, but we kind of just reformatted this as a regulation. So with regulations, they don't necessarily have to follow the same formality as when a board is adjusting or adopting a policy. The board can delegate to me, the superintendent, on creating a regulation and the details within it to implement any given policy. And these would be the regulations that we would use to make sure we are adhering to policy 7025, which is aligned with some of what we saw on the high school campus last year, that we felt like we needed more clarity around what isn't okay on our school property. And so there's two ways that this can happen. I can develop them and attach them to policies, and I need to let you know about it, or the board can actually adopt a regulation. And you do that every year. You adopt the fees for our facilities. It's the only regulation that since I've been here, that the board has actually adopted. And so what the policy committee has talked about is reformatting this and then sending it out on Sunday in the week to the community and let them know we're considering shifting this to a regulation, and then talking about in our next meeting about whether or not this should be something that the board would adopt, or if it would be something that the superintendent would attach to policy 7025. And then we would look at, as we would start to get ready for next school year, are there pieces of this regulation that we should talk about in terms of embedding into the code of conduct, what we can't do at this point. So we'll be talking about that when we get to that point of the agenda. And then Adam, if you could share with some Instagrams on here.
Yeah, we have two Instagrants tonight, thanks to the CSF. 5.2 was written by Andrea Dorio, who's a fourth grade teacher at Roaring Brook. Legos have come a long way since I was playing with Legos as a kid. And you can see all the complexity of the different kits that we have now. And so these things support so much of what we believe to be true about learning, that is collaborative, tactile, creative and critical thinking, problem solving skills, kids working in teams, et cetera. Lego has also produced quite a bit of good curriculum too, so that these things come with activities that the students can engage in. So this is the first one. The max of an Instagram is 2,500. So you could see Mrs. Dorio almost maxed it out there with almost 2,500. And then the second one, you can see this was written by our middle school music teachers. They were recording their concerts with using cell phones, and the quality of that kind of recording for the students to then listen back and kind of do like a critical listening activities around that is not as strong as some of the new recording equipment. So this grant will give them the capacity to have a little more sophisticated recording equipment, the cases, tripods, things like that. And then they also have some tuners that are in there. You can see those on the right side.
Thank you, Adam. And then Jamie, do you want to come up to the mic and talk about the merger that we have on the agenda tonight?
So we met last week with our hockey team. Our hockey program has been a very successful program for a number of years, but our numbers are just diminished right now. We had some students move out of district and then are not going to play. So we are looking to do a merger with John Jay Cross River. That's another program that has been a long-standing tradition, but they were not having hockey this year due to their numbers. They weren't having it at all. By merging, it just puts us into a healthy and safer environment for competition. It'll give us the right amount of numbers, the right levels to compete with, that I think will benefit the athletes, certainly from our school and actually that school as well.
Any questions about that?
What school do they play under? Is it us because we're the host school?
Yeah, so we're what's called the host school. So for right now, we're also merged for girls ice hockey. Brewster is the host school for that. We would be the host school, which means we manage the sport. And then at the end of the season, you do a financial breakdown of per pupil, just like we do in the other sports. But we'd be the ones administering it. I would be responsible for the officials and checking in our schedules, things of that nature. Correct. That's the only level that we offer varsity ice hockey.
All right. Thanks, Jamie. I know you're running in
Thank
between
you.
meetings, so thank you for coming. All right. And then that is the end of the superintendent's update. We have a bunch of activities going on between now and our next meeting. So we are looking forward to seeing our families at all of our events. And we also have our parent-teacher conferences for our K through 6 parents. So that's something else that we'll be facilitating over the course of the next 2 weeks. And hopefully one of our staff teams will be successful at the spelling bee. That hasn't happened yet. But Lisa and I will be there in full force with Carol Bartlick, and we're hoping to put up a good show. Okay. And so now I want to, Adam and I are moving forward in co-chairing Science of Literacy Fellowship. And so at last year in June, we had shared that we would be updating the board at this point, just on our work that's based off of the audit that we received on our K-6 program. And so I'm going to turn over the clicker to Adam. And I think if there's questions, as we just like we did last week, we'll stop at a slide, and if there's questions, we just ask them. Is that okay with everyone if we follow that format? Okay, great.
All right, so we thought we'd start this part of the presentation with just a reminder that we did have the audit in the spring, and we got a report back from the company that we had contracted with to do the audit. The report is posted on the website. It's still there if people haven't seen it yet. And we've structured this report or this kind of presentation around that report and the recommendations. So the report had 6 main recommendations, and this is kind of a little bit of a review. We've seen these before. These were the things that were recommended as the major components or next steps of that report, and we're going to kind of take them in turn as we go. All right, the first one is to establish a formal philosophy of literacy. So we've put together a literacy fellowship, a mixed group of faculty, K-12, as well as administrators. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that fellowship later in the presentation. But we started with some activities and protocols after we did some reading on the science of reading, looking at the New York State briefs, et cetera. We started to distill what we believe deeply about literacy instruction, grounded in the research, but also grounded in our experiences as leaders and teachers. And this is a summary. We have a statement now that's in draft form, and I pulled out some of the core components. Each of these is like a short paragraph in the actual statement, which we hope to publish soon. The fellowship is actually meeting tomorrow to give this another look and another iteration of this. But you can see the main points on the "This We Believe" statement, and there's things on here: literacy as a foundation. We believe in instruction across all areas. We believe in the teaching of the foundational skills, that student choice and voice matters. We believe in transferable skills, collaborative learning, explicit instruction, future-ready literacy, informed citizenship, lifelong learners, and then there's our district commitment. And the reason that this was important to us was that we wanted to really distill and ground our work and thinking before we went off and started looking at programs. We thought if we had a really good, strong foundation and agreement around a belief system, that it would be easier then to look at programs and have kind of a basic criteria of how programs stack up and align to things that we deeply believe as a district. All right, we then started to work on the philosophy of literacy, and we did this by grade bands. We had faculty and administrators break up into these groups. You can see K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12. And we started to draft the philosophy of literacy statement, again, grounded mostly in the New York State briefs, which are grounded in the science of reading and other research. And each of these philosophy statements includes an introduction, core beliefs, research foundation, goals, and instructional practices. So we have a philosophy statement now, a pretty good, solid working draft in these grade bands. And again, the fellowship's meeting again tomorrow, where they'll go over and do some revisions on this. So we're not quite ready to publish them all together, but I did want to share with you an example of some of the work that's been done so far. I stamped it as a draft. It still is very much a working draft, but it has been provided, the fellowship worked on it, gave it to us. We did a little wordsmithing, gave it back to them for some feedback, made some adjustments. And then tomorrow we're going to do some further refining of this.
Adam, before you go on, I know you have it in your later slides, but I think it might be helpful for us to understand when you talk about the fellowship, who's in it, how you came to the fellows, how long it's going to be, and your idea of why that was done that way. Because then it just sort of provides a context to what we're listening to, and we're thinking about who's part of that fellowship to come up and make these decisions.
Yeah, so a fellowship is language we use. We've had a number of fellowships over the years. We have our district equity team is running as a fellowship, and this is our literacy fellowship this year. We also have a strategic planning fellowship. A fellowship is our kind of deepest and most significant and longest running commitment that a faculty member would make to a professional learning and kind of consulting experience for us. So there are some things like an in-service class, for example, that will run over the course of several weeks or even over the course of a semester, where we'll offer our faculty and leadership will offer in-service courses. And that's like you can think of that almost as like a mini graduate course where it's like a semester long. A fellowship runs multiple years. So the fellowship commitment is a 2-year commitment that the faculty members make. The first step is a SMOA that we enter into an agreement with the Teachers Association. And that SMOA talks about the compensation structure, number of meetings, how much time, those kinds of things, how many participants we'll have. Once the SMOA is approved by the board, by us, the district and also the CCT and the Board of Education, then we open up the applications and there's an application process. So we'll have kind of a posting for the fellowship. Teachers will apply. Usually as part of that application, there's some writing that they do. In this case, we ask teachers to share their experience, background, and also some ideas that they had after they reviewed the report. And then we'll make some decisions based on who we think is can significantly contribute. Our faculty, like, we wish we could have them all on the fellowship, but that's not always practical. And so we try to make decisions across how to make a rounded team. So we have representation across buildings, across grade levels, also areas of specialty. So like reading teachers, for example, also classroom teachers, some building administrators, some district administrators, those kinds of things.
And then our administrative team, we asked them if they'd like to participate in the fellowship, and then they join the fellowships on their own accord. There's no application, there's no compensation for our administrators. It's just, there's a difference between involvement in that way. And for the fellowships, they're co-chaired by us. So I co-chair the three that we have in place. Andrew and I are co-chairing the DET, and then Adam and I co-chair this fellowship and the strategic plan. So we make sure the work goes forward. Go ahead.
Yes, there's a significant amount of work that happens outside of the meetings. There's usually readings associated with it, providing feedback, and in some cases site visits. In some cases, there's for some release time so we can listen to like vendor presentations, things like that. We'll visit other school districts. There's all kinds of other components that are tied to these fellowships as well. Okay, so that's the formal philosophy of literacy. So the first one, we're well on the road of having that nailed down. I think we've got some really good drafts. It's about 7 pages long, the entire document. We'll get something published fairly soon. The second recommendation was to provide professional learning around the science of reading. And so I broke this part into a couple of different sections. The first one is just the programmatic shifts that we made. And I did want to provide an overview. I won't read through the whole chart, but we break this down into reading comprehension and language, writing, phonics and word study, handwriting and typing, and then intervention programs. And you can see across the elementary grades, in this case, K4, what we're using as kind of anchoring each of these components: units of study for reading, units of study for writing. Let's Gather is a component of units of study for reading comprehension and language. That moves up to unit, mentor texts and read alouds. We're still using phonics first, and then benchmark starting in grade 3. Benchmark goes up to grade 5. And then handwriting without tears is our K4 program. And that does include cursive. Sometimes parents ask us if we're doing some cursive instruction, and we are. I'm hearing myself as a little bit of an echo, but okay, let me keep going. And then intervention, Wilson, level literacy.
Is someone listening to Adam as Adam speaks?
On the Zoom on a phone.
What's happening? Are you ready? Oh, I can hear myself still. Okay. All right, go ahead, Adam.
All right, and then more recently we've shifted a few things in K2. This was prior to the review that we had done. New units of study in K2. This is now, I think it's the second year that those are in place now. Addition of phonic decoding assessments, decoding text purchases for all of the classrooms. Year-long science of reading PD that we've offered our K2 teachers with Shauna Schwartz. And then also Heggerty. We were in the middle of piloting Heggerty. We had some really good results coming out of Heggerty. We did press the pause button. We didn't buy any new sets of Heggerty or do any additional training with Heggerty. But that's something for us to do some thinking about and work on with the fellows that we have. But that's a phonological phonemic awareness program. It's Heggerty.
And I do appreciate that, just taking a pause when necessary. And I did read that in the report too. They strongly recommended that you take a pause in piloting further, just until we figure this out, which makes sense. So I do want to thank you for that.
Yeah.
Just a lot of language that everybody may not be as super familiar with. Can you discuss the difference between phonics coded and phonemic?
Yeah, so phonics is generally done on paper, and phonemic awareness is generally done without paper. So phonemic awareness is a lot of the like blending, rhyming, segmenting. It's things you could do in your car with your kid, as you're kind of playing the word games and things like that. Teaching phonics is more of the writing and the letter sound. So we introduce phonics in and students are drawing like with their finger in sand, for example, or with a red crayon on the bumpy boards. And that's when they start to write the letters and associate the letters with the sounds, and that blends the letters together, things like that. So that's the main difference between the two. All right, so then we go on to some professional learning shifts that we've made. We are not engaged with professional development through Teachers College or through Mossflower in any way that we had been in the past. Previously, we had Teachers College units of study professional developers throughout the district, so that you've approved contracts that are separate from that now. And so we've parted ways in that way. You do see, I'm not going to read through all of these things, but you can see kind of a commitment to science of reading in various levels with various teams as we've gone through since, 2023. I went back to just to give you a sense of some of the professional development experiences that we've offered. You can see the consultant names. You've approved those contracts on board agendas recently. And then you can see we've done some things with K2 decodable libraries to reorganize local libraries so they are more, grounded in the science of reading and what we now know is best when it comes to what students are reading. Right, and then upcoming on November 1st, this is a little bit of a preview. We have a superintendent conference day on the 1st, and the entire superintendent conference day, or a big chunk of the superintendent conference day, the theme of that day is the science of reading. And so all of our faculty K-12 are going to be engaged in a framing session in the morning where they will have a chance to dig into the briefs from New York State, which are grounded in the science of reading. And then we have Gravity Goldberg coming as our keynote. Our keynote is going to be specifically about the science of reading. And then we have choice sessions after that to, have faculty engage in work that's more like content area specific for them so they can leave with strategies that they can use. I, for example, am doing a session for secondary STEAM teachers on how to integrate science of reading practices in their STEAM classrooms, science classrooms, for example. All right, so the third recommendation is to replace the units of study in reading and writing. And this is, if things weren't complicated enough, this is where things get pretty complex for us. So what we've been doing, and Carol Bartlick has been helping a lot. She's now our kind of interim elementary director. She's been doing a lot of research for us and helping us organize this. We've begun to create a pretty robust spreadsheet of the programs that are available out there, literacy programs that are available, looking at the components of the program, the structure, the core lesson features, what kind of professional development is available, intervention programs available and tied to them, the extent to which they're culturally responsive, if they have digital components to them. So we're putting together, the spreadsheet kind of goes on and on with lots of columns. You can see this is just a small snapshot. You can see some of them: Wit and Wisdom, Benchmark Advance, Amplify, Into Reading. The list is very significant. And we're looking at some of the evaluations, what's been approved by states that have kind of right to read initiatives. We're looking at Ed Reports, the What Works Clearinghouse, Learning List. These are all like groups that have kind of vetted some of these resources. So we're putting together a big list of resources. We've stopped short of like pros and cons. We're just trying to gather information on the programs that are available.
So Adam, what happens after the pros and cons list is formulated? And I know we have a multi-pronged literacy programming. So like you find something, like then what's the next step? Like, is the action plan to sort of trial it, or like, how does that work?
Yeah, it could be piloted. I have a slide and a few slides from the literacy fellows in their timeline in terms of what that vetting process looks like, in terms of hearing from, usually you hear from, we'll survey the region, we'll talk to other districts, which I'm going to share in a minute. We'll kind of narrow down our list. We'll invite in some sales reps. We'll ask them to bring materials or provide materials ahead of time so we can see the resources that they have. We will include site visits as part of that. So we'll try to find some similar school districts and go and visit their classrooms, talk to their faculty.
So what are we talking about timeline? After pros and cons list is made to implementation, like over a year? I mean, what's the time frame on that?
Yeah,
I think the we have to do, and it's hard because you want to be able to say, well, by September we'll be in the mix of using a new approach, right? But the issue that we're having is we've just formulated our philosophy, which is we're following the steps in the audit, right? So now we have to match our philosophy to what is currently
Right, and there's no
available, right?
unicorn program that
Well,
checks
and-
all the boxes.
And you'll see when we go through here that the schools that are performing at our level or above are continuing with the workshop. And so like so this is gonna take us time to figure out like what our next steps are, because this decision is so significant. We'll also share with you some of the results of schools that have shifted away from the workshop and what their outcomes look like right now, because what we need to understand is that a shift of this nature could put us in a situation where our students aren't performing at the same level.
Just
And
to
so-
be clear,
so-
workshop and units of study are synonymous. just for
That's
people.
how I'm using it
Yeah.
right now.
Okay.
So I'm not, what I'm trying to say is we have to take our time and we have to use the wisdom of our committee to figure out really what is the best next step for us collectively based on what Adam is about to show you.
So, oh,
ahead.
okay, so I guess my then follow-up to what Matt asked would be then understanding all that this does take time and knowing that this fellowship is going to take 2 years. Selecting a new curriculum for the literacy program is one thing, but I know that in the report, it's very clear that there's action steps that we can take immediately, like that we could have taken like September, the first day of school, to sort of bridge the gaps that have been identified, and a lot of them that we've already known about, whether it's in the writing, right? Because that's fine. I do agree with that, making a complete overhaul and changing the curriculum in haste would actually hurt the students than benefit. But I think at the same time, we have students in those early years, K1, 2, specifically, that are right now within, and I'm not saying that there's not good instruction happening, because thank you so much to the great teachers of this district that is working really hard to make this work for their individual classes. But I do think there seems, and I might not be understanding the report maybe the same way, but there seems to be a real desire from the teachers, the classroom teachers, to want to align vertically, not just horizontally on their grade level, but the vertical cohesion that seems to be like missing, the pacing of it, and understanding which parts of the components are we going to probably continue using. And then like they know now that Heggerty's on pause. But for example, like what are we doing with phonics, which they do appreciate, but we have 2 types. And then we had the Heggerty, right? We had the phonics first, and then we had the benchmark. And although it's for different ones, so like, are we looking to merge anything? Are we, I don't have the answers for that. But I think there is a sense of urgency. And again, my kids are reading and writing. I hope they're well out of that stage. But for the folks that have kids in these early years and are struggling, then we get into the whole assessment piece about the different tiers and what we need to do there. So I guess I just want to reiterate the urgency of that. And so as we're going through this really a deeper dive into what was already evaluated, I guess, with our own people, taking the recommendations, I think we need, and you might, and I know that you will get into some of it, is that we need to know like what are the action steps that we're taking currently as you're doing this, as you're thinking about which curriculum we're going to replace the units of study with. So that's one piece of it. It's not the whole piece. Like we know that we could work on writing. So like, can we do something about that?
Yeah,
Right.
yes, and I do also want to share, because I'm glad we have a balanced approach that pulls in different strategies from multiple programs. And some of the options available would replace them and some would not. So that's also like a real deep consideration. if you select a program up there, some of them have phonics included, which would mean we would no longer do phonics first. Others of them don't. So it's a really complicated, complex decision for us to make. And so that's, hopefully people will start to understand that better as we go through this. And we're trying to follow the audit as it was laid out, because I think it's laid out in a way was systematically done. So we fully flush out what we feel like we need collectively as a group before we start evaluating these different approaches. But there are some strategies that we can use right now based on what was shared in that audit as well. So go ahead, Adam.
Can I, before we move on, I have questions about this, if that's okay. So when you, I guess, added a lot of the stuff that we've added, like the phonics first and the benchmarks, at that point, we were starting with our foundation being the TC units of study, and we were finding things that complemented it and filled in the gaps. And based on what Christine just said, it seems like some of the options out there are more comprehensive. Others still feel like are pieces of it. So I guess the questions I have are, as this team is evaluating, are we looking with an eye towards sort of how these pieces play together? And I understand there may be a preference on some level towards something more comprehensive, although it feels to me that if the teachers have also just spent a considerable amount of time getting all this PD and the stuff that we've added, it might not feel as good to them to then have to.
So we're thinking about that. So I think what would be helpful is, Adam, if you skip to like ahead 2 slides, because it kind of illustrates what you're talking about in a different way.
Because
So-
then my other sort of piece to that question is, and maybe this is just.
All right, hold on, just go back 1 slide. So this is our ranking in the state, right? So you can see we're high, we're very high. So what Adam and his team did is they tried to look at the 25 schools in this bend here to see what their approaches were. So that's the next slide. So I think that would help kind of illustrate what you're talking about, Hillary, and maybe have a fuller conversation about the complexities of this. So you'll see up here. Well, Adam, why don't you go ahead and explain it? Put the
Yeah,
slide
so
together.
this just what you're looking at here is these are the top 25 districts as ranked in 2023 state test results, because we don't have the 2024 rankings yet. So this is the most recent that we have, but know that this is a 2023, not 24. And this is proficiency level. So this is the percentage of students that are scoring a 3 or a 4 on the 4-point assessment. And so we basically have all the districts in the entire state. The previous slide showed that there were 696 districts, and or at least groups that were ranked here. But they call them districts on the ranking, and we're ranked number 10. And you can see we pulled the top 25. And the reason we pulled them is because we wanted to get a sense of what programs are they using, and like this, we're using this to inform our list of other programs that we should potentially look into. Now, this was, I tried really hard to represent all of these accurately, but it's challenging because in some cases you can pull this information from the website. The website may be up to date. It may not be up to date. I don't know specifically who's changed or is changing. So I don't think anybody should take this as like, this is the absolute right now, but this is the best we could do. We also called many of these school districts. And there's also, there's a little bit of a nomenclature piece where some people will call something, oh, we use the workshop, we use units of study, there's pieces that we have to interpret a little bit of, like, what's your core program. It's always not always as clean, but you can see here that in the top 25 schools, you can see their reading program, writing program, phonics program, and phonemic awareness program, to the extent that they had one or they were willing to share it, or we could find it, the top 25 in the state.
And we don't know of those schools, particularly the ones ahead of us, the ones still utilizing the units of study according to this, if they are making changes just as we are.
Yeah, we had several conversations with school
Okay.
districts as we were going through. We didn't find any school districts that had indicated that they were doing, that they were shifting from units of study.
That they were in a process like ours.
And
They were not.
They were not.
so I guess one question I have is, on this list where it says homegrown or something like that, that's kind of we made it up?
Yeah, it's very rare for a school district to home grow the entire program, like from the ground up. But in many cases, they'll find a program and they'll adopt it and they'll realize it doesn't work as like out of the box. And so over the years, teams of teachers will work to make adjustments. They'll move units around. They'll maybe build a unit on their own and scrap a unit that doesn't work as well. And so the homegrown programs are very often rooted in a previous program. You see here, for example, like homegrown workshop. I would imagine that is rooted deeply, but although I don't know, I would imagine it's rooted in the TC units that they've made some adjustments to.
Well, because that's kind of my second question, which maybe, I mean, this is not my background, is not as an educator, but it seems that we have a lot of really good programs at our disposal. And we know that the audit told us to move away from using TC as our base. But I'm a little hesitant to just, and I know the team's doing a ton of research and is going to come up with the best option, but none of these options seem perfect, right? And I'm a little worried that 5 years from now, we're going to learn that. So I wonder how much of this is something where our teachers can be given the programs to work with and develop the programming in their classrooms that works for their
Right. So I
students.
think that's a good point. I think what we have to do is the next phase of this is really looking at the different approaches that are out there beyond the units of study to see if there is a different way for us to think about teaching instruction without compromising the things that I know that we do well. And so like that's the first step was, what do you believe? We're there, we're about to finish. The next step is, okay, now that we need to shift because the units of study are no longer in production, like, okay, what's out there? What can we look at? What are some materials that we should start considering? And so the first step in trying to figure that out is what is out there. And so that's what we've been working on at this point, now that we've got our philosophy almost set. I just caution us and the community on moving too quickly, looking at this, and then we're going to show you some outcomes of districts that switched. And I would
You're
anticipate.
talking about ones who switched prior to this year, because there's no
yeah.
real data
Yeah,
from
because
this year yet.
yeah, right. And
No,
so
look,
I'm just cautious about like switching without us taking our time to really be thoughtful about it. And then some of our outcomes are not what the expectations of our community are.
I bet you other
appreciate-
districts are waiting for us to switch first, and then they're gonna come.
No,
to us.
that
I can
might be
also,
true.
I mean, I think it's easy to argue against this slide. Just, you could correlate this slide with home values, or, I mean, there's certain cherry picking of the demographics here. Where, you know, the kids in Scarsdale and the kids here, they have exceptional foundations at home with outside help. So I don't necessarily think that this tells me anything other than that I think everybody is going to be forced to move, obviously, because I don't think that the units of study are going to be in publication much longer. So I think like that's a business decision that people are going to make. But outside of this siloed region, people have gone away from this pretty uniformly. So I think like that, I think the number one question that people would have is, you know, we were given, and I understand not moving too quickly, but is there, I know we paused Hegarty, what was holding us back from pausing the units of study going into this year? Was it our teachers not being prepared to sort of adopt a new way of teaching, or like what was the guiding light in like continuing saying like this year, 2024, 25, we're going to stick with this?
I guess the answer to that is we don't know what we would do instead. We
Right,
don't,
so
we haven't
there-
picked a program. There is no, if we were able to pull this up and see half of these school districts use program A, then we could take a real deep look at program A, go visit the schools, see it in a similar district, look at their data, meet with some sales reps, get numbers about what it would cost to come up with an implementation plan, a training plan, decide how we can roll it out. How different is it from our current program?
So currently what our teachers are armed with, this is a necessity for them?
Oh, yeah, this is like an anchor of school at you know, K8. Yeah, this is like really at the core of what we do. This is what we do.
And maybe you can go
And-
further and share a little bit about so Connecticut made a huge switch. So we have some slides in here that kind of illustrate some of the results from that switch. And so maybe we can share that too. So.
Yeah, so this is just a quick graph. We just took the data from the previous page and put it out at, just so you could see, get a sense of where the programs were. And one of the challenges based on the last question is there isn't really a second option that has like this, it's a market share there in terms of these top performing districts. So then to move on to some of the results. So we have, New York City, not a similar school district, right? But it does give us some data that we can look at where New York City did make a change in their New York City Reads initiative. That was 2023. We have 2023 and 24 school year data for them. This is grades 3 through 8 ELA. This is proficiency rates. And you can see that, I think that it's been pretty widely reported that they didn't see the kinds of gains that they were hoping that they would see by shifting their programs and basically, moving to one of the other SOR programs. You can see here a breakdown by grade. Again, 2024 is the bottom there, and you're just not seeing what I think they had hoped they would see as they made this transition. I think it's fair to say that many, if not most, of the schools in New York were using units of study, and they made it so that was not an option for schools, for the vast majority of schools in New York City, and so they shifted. And so again, you don't see that like jump that you would have hoped to see.
Right. Well, that's just because of the reasons we just mentioned, right? Because, even if it was the best other choice, if you don't go into it prepared and teachers having the proper training and the resources, there's going to, at the end of the day, all of this stuff, it's at the student's expense. That's really what it is. And that's why the sense of urgency is there. And so while I appreciate the chart, it was sort of like, when I heard that New York City was doing that, it was a big groan across the city for teachers who understood that this is not going to work. And it was going to be at the student's expense. And somebody somewhere up high made this decision. And obviously we don't want to do that. And so we have you leading, with Christine leading the team. But I guess, again, I think the really bottom line question is not which curriculum are we going to switch to, but what are we doing now to help the kids right now, today, like today in all of the first grade classes with all the first grade teachers. What are we doing now to really equip them to say, hey, these are the things that I saw in the report that was very long. And we want to help you figure out how you can work best in your building to work with, if you're a second grade teacher, how are you going to work with your kindergarten and first grade and third grade and fourth grade teachers to say, let's make that vertical alignment on just phonics or just the beginnings of writing, right? So I think most people understand that choosing a new curriculum and figuring out the intricacies and the really big challenge of finding the right one that may or may not really work is real. But I think the piece is, while you're doing that, can we still do something else right now, today, tomorrow, next week, for our littlest learners that's learning how to read and write and figure that out. And I think that's sort of, and if it's about even just revisiting the pacing calendar on how we do things in our reading and writing workshops, or looking at the different scaffolds, or really zooming in on, can we help the tier 1 students? Then would this alleviate their numbers in the tier 2, tier 3 level, right? So if we address tier 1, maybe that's going to take care of a lot of things, and we don't have to go to tier 2, or really there shouldn't be that many tier 3 issues. So just, again, I do have a background in this, right? But I'm not going to be the one trying to make those recommendations. I think I'm just trying to think out loud in terms of what most people are feeling with students that are young in age, that are learning how to read and write better. And even the parents of kids who are, I have a kid in 6th grade learning through grammar and figuring out their writing and looking at syntax and all of that. So I think just if there was something that we can do together today to help all of the learners in our district, especially, K-6 really. What shifts can we make right now? I think that's the piece while you're working on all the other important things too. So because there's that sense of urgency, because it's really at the expense of our students.
It's one of the things that makes this work really complicated for us is the audit was a snapshot in time at a time where our literacy program was in pretty significant flux at the primary level. And the reason I say that is because we had just purchased it was the first year of implementation, not even a full year, of the new units of study K2. The new units of study K2 had different practices, which we had to train the teachers in, but it also had a lot more explicit instruction in phonics. The previous units of study did not. And so by adopting phonics first, several years before that, I think it's been in place like 6 or 7 years at this point, we saw that gap, we identified it early, we filled it with phonics first. We hadn't gotten a preview of the new units of study. We felt like even though we knew that this might not be a long-term commitment, our kids do deserve access to the most recent thinking of the program that we have. So we had a conversation with the board about purchasing those units, even if we were just going to use them for a year or two. In the first year of implementation, we had the audit and the faculty shared, rightly so. This doesn't, it conflicts, the phonics instruction in these units of study now conflict with phonics first, and we don't know which to prioritize, what order to do it in, which to teach. That's the kind of thing that it was a known problem to us, and it was something we needed to work through. And if that means you pull the program, or if that means you pull one of the programs, or if that means you take a look at a different phonics program, or somehow organize those things and help the faculty work with the faculty to figure out which of those things to teach, like that was kind of a known thing to us. So to answer your question, let me go back to so what do you do right now to the first grade teacher? What we have been hearing from the Board of Education and the report is that the expectation is that we look at other programs and strongly consider shifting. So we're not investing the time right now in fixing the conflict between phonics first and the phonics that's embedded in the units of study. We could do that, but we've got limited resources to be able to focus on all these things. And this is a significant amount of work to do this work at the same time. We just can't do all of those things if we're going to leave the units sooner than later anyway. So that's kind of
So what is the guidance then? Can I ask what the guidance is that the administration is giving to those teachers who knowing? So now you're saying that you already knew, everybody knows. If they didn't know before, everybody knows now because of this. What is the actual directives then and the guidance that we're providing, saying that, yeah, there is a conflict between the units of study and the revised versions in how they implemented phonics instruction into the units of study versus phonics first? Indicate, and
Right.
then also in the benchmarks, and then how are you marrying the fluency part of that and then the comprehension part of that and the encoding part? So all of these things, then what has been told to the teachers that they should be doing, and what guidance has been given, and what resource have they been given so that they can navigate through like we just said, that all these known problems that they're facing. And I guess that's something that, I don't know, I'm not the teacher. So what is that?
So the problem, just to put it into some context, it's things like a letter sound is introduced at one time in phonics first, and it's later introduced again in the units of study. And so the question for the teacher is, do I reteach it as part of the units of study? Do I just gloss over it?
So it's not in conflict.
Has
it's
it already been
superfluous
taught?
to a certain extent.
But teachers are, and it's frustrating, right? And I understand that the teachers they have two different programs where I taught this letter sound 3 weeks ago, and now here it is, I have to teach it again. And so you've got to make a decision. Do I teach it again? Do I just skip over that part? And I'm probably oversimplifying it, but that's the kind of thing we're talking about, that we have read words as part of phonics first, where it's the kind of sight words. And so they're also introduced as part of the units of study. And so it's which sight words do we use? Do we use the read words from phonics first? Should we be building our read word vocabulary through that? Or do we use the units of study, or do we somehow try to blend them? And those are the things that I think that teachers have been faced with. The guidance has been, use your professional discretion on what you think is best. Teach the phonics first curriculum. If you feel like you can skip pieces of it in the units of study, then skip those pieces. And so that's where we've kind of landed on.
So you are leaving some discretion to the individual teachers on
Yes,
this.
and there always is. There has to be, absolutely.
And I guess so. piggybacking on Kaylee's question, because I think there are two sets of probably parents more so than kids, but two sets of parents feeling some urgency around these findings. The first is the group Kaylee referenced, so I'm not going to rehash that, but the other is parents who we've added a lot over the last couple of years, right? We've added real handwriting components. We've added real grammar components that weren't there previously, some spelling that. So there are also a lot of families who feel like, hey, missed the boat. Like if my kid was a couple of years younger, they would have learned grammar, but here we are. Are there, as we're exploring these programs that we've either added or are adding to supplement, are there any sort of Band-Aids, for lack of a better word, to add later in the curriculum to help the kids who didn't get grammar in elementary?
I don't know if I would share that students didn't receive grammar instruction at any point in their experience here. I think we're in a place where we're looking for a new writing approach based on the units of studies no longer being in publication. Our outcomes aren't, I understand people are concerned, but our outcomes are excellent. And so there is a sense of urgency from certain parents around the work that we need to do moving forward. But the outcomes that we are experiencing throughout the district, K through 12, are very high. And so, and I'm not saying that we can't improve and we can't do better. I'm not sharing that at all. Of course, I feel like there's always room for growth, but I also know that, we could share with you how our students do on the NWA. We can share with you what our reading levels are right now, K through 2. We can share with you how many students are in reading. Like that's all data that we have that we can share with the board, to demonstrate that our kids are reading, our kids are writing, our kids are learning every day here. We're just at a place where we need to explore and figure out what we're going to do next based on the units of study no longer being in publication. If they were in publication, I don't know if we'd be having this conversation in the same way.
Can I ask, the conference day, you guys are gonna go over New York State's briefs that they're calling them. Do we think there's guidance in the briefs that are really helpful for this conversation?
I think the briefs are actually very well done. I think that they're pretty strong. At the state level, they were actually written by a Harvard professor and others. I think they give us a lot of guidance in terms of next steps. Interestingly, a lot of the pieces that I think that we should really do some thinking about as a district haven't entered the larger conversation here as a district. One of them is like the explicit teaching of an academic vocabulary through science and social studies, for example. Vocabulary building, that's content vocabulary building. We haven't been spending a lot of time talking about those things and working on those things, and I think that we would be well served too. And that kind of thing is in the briefs. In the briefs, there is also a lot of kind of narrative around some of the things that we've been talking about for years, like all the way going back to when we adopted phonics first, I think it was 7 years ago, which is that kids should have the explicit instruction in phonics. That argument's kind of like settled at this point, and we believe it to be true, and we've been doing it for 6 years or so since we adopted phonics first. So the parts of the briefs that I think seem to be the parts that we're having a lot of conversations about, nobody's really arguing about anymore. It's, I think, some of those other things that would really lift the level of our literacy experience here.
I also we're going in order of the audit. That's the recommended order, right? It's establish your philosophy of literacy, provide professional learning, which we've shared with you that we're doing, and then it's replace the units. So now we're in the space where we're figuring out, okay, what does that look like? We have to do a deep process involving our faculty before we make any decisions, and that will take time. And I know that there's urgency here around this, and people want us to do something immediately, but this is one of those areas where we're trying to demonstrate and share with you that there's not a clear roadmap for us. And so when there's not a clear roadmap, we need to take more time to figure out what's right, because if we make the wrong decision, the outcomes for our kids will not be aligned with what they need to be. Like when we did phonics, it was clear. There were like 2 or 3 approaches that were, okay, let's really look into these and see if they make sense for us, because we had partner districts using them.
Yeah,
That's not the case here.
I don't think anybody's disputing the fact that we need to take our time and like look for the right program and make sure that we're doing you know, finding the right fit for the district, whether it's replacing everything or finding something that aligns with the other programs we're currently using. I think though that it feels like a very different trajectory when you're looking at the district, right? Which is what we're doing up here versus you're looking at a kid, right? And that's what a lot of our parents are doing,
Yeah,
is
I
they're looking
understand.
at their child versus, so I think that what I was trying to sort of drive at, and I think what Kaylee was driving at, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that like we have to balance both, right? Like making sure that we're doing what's best for the district as a whole, but also making sure that in that process of taking our time, we do everything we can to make sure we're filling in any gaps for the kids
Right.
sort of there right now.
I
And-
think, and I'm sorry, Kayla, were you gonna say
Yeah,
something?
and I was just gonna say also, and like, while we're talking really honestly and openly, you know, when I saw that chart come through with Chappaqua, you know, I know you talked about what data shows in our our kids' test grades and all of that, but, you know, and I said this before in another meeting, that when I saw that we were number 10, I could have said, well, why aren't we the top 3? I could have said that, right? But to me, that doesn't really illustrate. So I don't really pay like, but you could say, well, is the glass half full or half empty, right? It's 10 is incredible considering how many schools, right? So it's like beyond excellent, right? And I know that we are. So to me, I would have put us at 1, right? But we're not. We're at 10. I'm not, all to say that I don't think, I don't want our good families and students' efforts and however they get there to those grades, whether they're SATs, ACTs, and then in the younger years, their ELA scores. I don't want us to think that for one moment that was like just us. And I'm not saying that you
Oh,
did,
yeah,
but
100%.
it's really that it's really the teachers, right? Taking that extra step to put all of these lots of things that align, that don't align, that conflict, that, you know, finding the time to do, you know, tailoring that instruction to that class, to those individual kids. Like, I think we want to keep that in mind as we try to help them while we're trying to figure out on the district level to help them sort of ease the struggle to teach their students. And that's just where I'm coming from. It's not a criticism to anyone to say this person didn't do their job, that person didn't do it well. You know, it's not that. It's really about, okay, we have this in front of us, and yes, we're going through, but also going back to the report, it does lay out really very concrete ways and what we can do now in sort of to help. And I think they really did sympathize with the teachers in a lot of ways, because they understand what it takes to, and how much passion and dedication they have to want to do this well and do it right with guidance. They want that. They want the guidance, right? And which is actually amazing and crucial, because sometimes teachers don't want to change. They just rather not, and they just want to do it the way they've been doing it. But the key takeaway is that the teachers want guidance and they want the change. So there, we're already so much more ahead. So I'm grateful for that.
Me too. I also want to share is that the framework for this is laid out for us really clearly. Like, it is, figure out what you're doing. Look at phonics, because there's a recommendation to move from, because of our Wilson Level 1 intervention program, we should explore whether or not we're going to move to foundations. Figure out your assessment, and then you start the change. You don't start the change before any of that has happened, which is why we got to systematically approach this in a way that's best aligned with what the audit recommends, in order to make sure that that our faculty and our building level administration can handle the change. So we're on step 3 and it's October, right? We started at step 1 in September. It's just step 3 is going to take a little bit of time because we have to get that decision right. We can't rush it. That doesn't mean we don't approach it with urgency, but we have to approach it with thoughtfulness, with site visits, and with deep understanding, because it's a huge shift for us. Did you want to go to the next thing?
So another thing that we're thinking about with the timeline is that Connecticut is going to be, the legislation that was rolled out in Connecticut is going to be really helpful for us if we give it enough time to be helpful for us. And so they have right to read legislation that was adopted in 2021. Last year, pretty much all school districts, there was a waiver process, but from what I understand, most of the waivers were denied. So districts had to shift over to one of the approved New York State programs.
Connecticut programs.
I'm sorry, did I say?
Yeah.
Connecticut, New York, Connecticut. They have this right to read legislation. And so the school districts had to shift. They could apply for a waiver. Most were denied. The thing here is that there are many districts in Connecticut that are very similar to ours and that were using units of study, and that now we're pressed to adopt one of the, I think, a handful, 6 or so programs that are science and reading aligned that the state approved. And so we're going to have data soon. We already have state data. They've published it from 2024. You can see the results of some of those things. But unlike New York City, we'll be able to see some very similar districts. We'll be able to, dig into districts that were running as we were running with units of study and that made that shift, and that we can learn not only from the program they adopted, but learn from the timeline, learn from the pain points, learn from the, if you were to do this again, what would you have done differently? We can look at school districts that did see improvement in their data, for example, and find those districts and what did you do, how did you train your teachers, what was the timeline, what was the rollout, et cetera. And so this is data that we've got to allow to come out. Like New York State, districts do report, and it is public data, which, like how districts are doing with regard to their performance, it just hasn't been published yet because it was, spring of 2024. The last year was the required year. So this is going to be really important for us, and another year for us to be thoughtful about our own kind of timeline and rollout. All right, I did provide some data. We do have assessments and screeners at the K2 level, just to give you a sense of where our students are. I wasn't going to read through all of these things, but I do share a lot of data for the first grade through 8th grade maps. And then we talk a lot about 3 through 8 assessments. So I just wanted to highlight a few things from our youngest learners here. And then also, since our last performance report, it was 2 weeks ago, we now have closed the window for maps for fall 2024. So this is data that I didn't have just 2 weeks ago as part of the performance report that we now have, where we can compare fall of 2023 with fall of 2024. And you can see, again, some really good progress, whether you look cohort to cohort. So
Those early years.
in those early years, you can look like first grade, this 2023 cohort is this second grade crew, but then you can also see kind of the program improvements that are there. So that's that's really good, promising data for us in terms of that MAPS data that we just got. So I wanted to share that because I didn't 2 weeks ago. All right, so then we have not yet, as Dr. Ackerman mentioned, we haven't dove into the 4 and 5 recommendation, but I did want to just touch on the fellowship. I know we can go, fairly quickly through some of these slides because we talked about the fellowship a little bit at the beginning of the presentation. But
I just want to share 4 and 5 may be impacted by what we select for number 3. That's we have to wait. We got to, because it's all connected.
And then so that establish a team-oriented approach. We thought that was important to do early. That was actually our number 1 because we felt like that was important to even start the work on the philosophy, et cetera. So that's where that fellowship came in. We did have the application go out last spring, late in the school year, but it was in the spring. And then
So are all the reading, I know you mentioned reading specialists, because you don't have literacy specialists in the district, right? They are different. So are all the reading specialists in the fellowship?
No, they're not. We have reading specialists representing each of the levels, but we don't have every one of our reading specialists from every school.
And your thinking behind that was?
Well,
We have only a limited number of applicants in the fellowship. And we have, if we wanted to make sure we had representation at all the buildings, and not all the reading teachers applied.
So this is our Science of Reading Fellowship. This is how we have them broken down by teams when they were, I just wanted to share with you when we were working on the philosophy, so you get a sense of the teams. Carol Bartlick is not on here. She's our interim director of elementary ed. So she has joined the team. Her name is not here, but she has joined the team. And obviously Dr. Ackerman and myself are also members.
I am happy to see that Jillian McRae is on there because I was wondering where our staff developers were in some of these conversations. Because, you know, with all of this too, like in respect of culturally responsive programs, like we want to think about that. And I don't know all the names. So, you know, I hope there's also teachers who are the ENL teachers, because that is growing. That population is also growing here in our district. So that's something to be considered because whether it's bilingual education or English as new language, this is something that play a big part in the way that kids learn how to read and write and just differently, depending on what type of student you are.
Yeah. So we do have Nadia Bufa is a new assistant principal at Roaring Brook, but not new to us. She was an ENL teacher here for
Okay.
many years, so has that background and training and brings that perspective. And also, in addition to Jillian, it's great to have Jillian because she is a secondary English. She was a secondary English, high school English teacher. She brings that perspective, but obviously does a lot of work in our sense of belonging, and you know that's a big part of her professional development role. And we have Kate Nauman, who's also a professional developer on the team. Her background is more elementary and early middle school, so. We have that represented as well. And of course, Mr. Corsilia, former Horace Greeley High School English teacher on the team. All right, so this is, I often will put up slides with quite a bit of text and then just not go through and just kind of have it on the record. But this, I think, is important that we pause and talk through this. It answers Matt's question before a little bit about potential timeline for rolling this out. And you can see September. These are the like a fellowship calendar. This is a timeline for the fellowship. So you can see September, the framing and drafting the philosophy of literacy, October, continued learning and finalize the philosophy. November, we're going to do a data dive into our local data and also some regional data. We're hoping to have some data from some districts over in Connecticut that can be informative to us. You can see December, Science of Reading program evaluation tools. There's a lot to know and learn about the various tools that are out there to use to evaluate programs and why something would get, for example, multiple green checks on one of the various evaluation systems. New York State has also put out an evaluatory kind of program evaluation tool. So we have to get smart about those things as a fellowship in order to be able to start looking at programs, almost using those as some rubrics. You can see January and February, program exploration, what's available, narrowing the field, through March, site visits, vendor presentations, April, development implementation timeline. We've got a lot of questions around what grades do you start with? Is this a full implementation? Are you rolling it in grade bands? So we've got work to do there. Obviously, there's some budget development work that also this needs to parallel our budget development process. Some of these programs are free, others are very expensive. And so it depends, as well as the professional development and things like that. We've got to consider as part of the budget process. You can see in May, deliberations and planning for a pilot, and then June, finalizing a pilot, details and logistics. That's our thinking as of right now, in terms of a timeline.
Let's talk about a pilot. Does that mean that we would trial it? Like, let's say you say the band we should start with is K1. Does that mean you would trial it across K1 or that you would roll it out in some K1 classrooms, but stick with what we're doing in other?
Yeah, so that's a question that the fellowship would need to kind of debate and decide. We have piloted things where we've said we're going to try it. We're going to try a particular unit, and everyone's going to teach the unit. In other cases, we've said to a teacher or a handful of teachers have volunteered. In some cases, we've even done a grade level at a school, so that way they can lean on each other, and we can provide the professional development and coaching within the school. So there's a lot of different ways that we could potentially pilot this.
We have to really think about it because a full implementation without a pilot can be highly problematic for us. But there probably will be some real consideration to full implementation at the same time, because we're talking about reading and writing. So this is not like a social studies curriculum. This is very different. And so everything that we do has to be really thoughtfully considered.
So I just wanted to share an example. Again, we're not going to get into the details of this. I just wanted to show an example of some of the learning that they've been doing in addition to the New York State briefs. This was an article that they read and an activity that we did around some quotes from the article. So I just wanted to share that as a sample. So we have some conclusions and takeaways that we wanted to share. And many of these things we've kind of hit along the way. The first is that our student performance is strong. It's getting stronger. We have much to lose by moving too quickly. I think you've heard that from us several times tonight. Early results related to literacy program shifts in other places have not produced consistently positive results. I think it's fair to say that they've been pretty mixed depending on the district, the type of rollout and the transition plan. Results continue to be published, especially as related to similar districts. We spoke about that with regard to the mining that we could potentially do in Connecticut. There's no perfect program. There are trade-offs with all of the options. New programs are under development. The relationship between rubrics and results is a topic of recent debate. So what's happening now that we're starting to see is there are some programs that have a lot of green checks with regard to them being very aligned to the research. But when it comes to now implementing those programs and getting student results, that the student results aren't necessarily lining up with the way the program stacks up with the research. So you get a program that checks all the boxes with the research, and then upon implementation, you would think, because of the logic of the model, that it would result in a high level of student learning. If the research says that students learn when you do these things, and we have a program with all of these things in it, then it makes sense that that's the program where students will learn to the literacy skills that you want them to learn. But what they're finding is that that's not always the case, that some of these programs that do very well with regard to how they rate on a rubric don't do as well when it comes to actual student results.
Do they know
Very-
why?
That are produced.
Could the variable be just the lag time of what the comfort that the teacher has with utilizing the new material or the new rubric that they're teaching? I mean, that just could be a variable that I'm thinking of that just doesn't necessarily correlate to say like this new program is not working. It might not be working yet as the teachers get more comfortable
Oh,
with
yeah.
it.
I
And
think
that-
that's really fair.
Can
I
definitely
I think we should anticipate an implementation dip.
Of course.
It's just, that's the reality of, I mean, I would be surprised if we didn't have that in some way. I just think we need to,
I was going to ask a related
Still
question. Just in my
consider
experience doing this kind of change work at the college level, we often saw performance dip before things got worse before they got better. But then your hope is that the better is better than your status
Right.
quo when you started. And this is just a really interesting situation where standing still is not a choice.
right?
And yet no one else is stepping forward yet.
But we have the benefit of
Yeah.
our partnerships with our Connecticut schools
Oh,
that are
yeah.
in tri-state with us.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we
Yeah.
can hopefully learn from their experience to inform our decision-making process.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I appreciate how comprehensive this all was, and I think you can tell based on our engagement, like, we want to stay on this, and you can tell how much it matters.
Yeah, of course.
All the board members, so thank you, Adam, for preparing all that
So he's got-
detail. You've
He's
come
got
at
6
us.
more points.
I think,
I can stop there.
yeah, no, I know he's got a little more to say, but I know we also are, I'm.
And I also have one
mindful-
more question.
mindful of Time too, but yeah, do you want to finish up and then we'll?
Yeah.
Take any
Yeah, just back to the dip that you were just talking about, the programs that are checking all the boxes, which seem like they would be a good choice, that aren't working out that way. Do they have any idea why? Is it they don't have the PD like Matt was saying, or is there something else happening?
Go ahead.
I
They
think that's
knew
gonna be
exactly.
part of our,
Okay.
our work. Like, we're gonna
Okay.
need to ask those questions as we explore these different programs and talk to administrators and teachers that are implementing them.
John Hattie that is kind of the famous meta-analysis educational researcher who looks at the effect size of teaching practices. And so separate from the science of reading, John Hattie does research to identify strategic things that teachers do that have a high positive effect size on student learning. And for years, he published these effect size studies, and teachers were adopting the high leverage effect size things and doing them more often. And Hattie then later came out, he actually was a speaker at one of our summer, I think it was one of our
Yes.
summer leadership retreats, right? And as part of that, he shared, and now he's written extensively on it, that it's not about those individual things. It's about how they work in combination. It's about how teachers string them together and how they strategically choose which ones to do and when to do them and how to do them, not necessarily that you're doing the top 10 and so you're going to lead to high learning. And so I think you're seeing the same thing with the rubric, that you can check all of these boxes, but how does the program really tie together all of these pieces in an an artistic way to really lead to a high level of student performance? I think some programs do it better than others. That's data that's kind of coming out now that we're seeing more of.
So my final question was, and I don't remember seeing anything about this. Are there ways now, because, not everybody could get into the fellowship, and, people might still want to be involved in some way. Is there a way of like reporting back, not reporting, but sort of sharing out? Are the fellows sharing out with then like their building levels, or their departments, so that, that it does really feel like it is a collaboration between everyone in the district, especially the classroom teachers, not just the fellows and the administrators who are leading the charge, so that there is buy-in, then there is collaboration, and that there, you do start thinking about the things that really, what the folks in front of the children are saying. So like, is there a way of sharing out the process and the progress that, or maybe asking for, hey, we're working on this right now, what are you thinking about?
Sure. So that's a great point, and sorry we didn't talk about that in a little bit more detail. So the like, for example, tomorrow at our meeting, we're going to be hopefully getting the philosophy of literacy to a place where it's ready to be pushed out to staff for full staff feedback before we finalize it. And then once we get down to a place where we think we have different programmatic approaches that were in deep consideration, we will open those opportunities to our faculty to give us feedback on that. So we'll narrow down the field, but we won't make the recommendation to the board without allowing all of our faculty who want to be a part of the process to have a full understanding and a voice in the decision-making process.
Thank you.
And to piggyback off that, with respect to the labor intensity of all of this, I'm not going to ask for something like this again, but I think it would be in the interest of transparency, just sort of even in your superintendent's reports, just the mileposts that Adam has outlined here, just a small update
Sure.
to the community. I think they would appreciate that.
I was thinking on in January, when we do the strategic plan and the DET, we do the reading fellows
Sure.
again. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yeah.
Because at that point, we'll be
Mhm.
3 more meetings in.
Yep.
January, right?
I think it's interesting that none of the other high-performing districts are moving towards changing. Like I said before, I think they're probably waiting for us to do it first.
I agree.
Which I
They
guess
are.
is a compliment. But at the same time, like, they're all sort of digging their heads in the sand, I think. And I think it's commendable that we are moving forward in this way, even though it's scary because we don't know exactly what we're going to pick, but I have faith that we will figure it out. So thank you for this report.
We have a good process in place. We've made a lot of strong decisions through strategic planning and the DET and other fellowships that we've had that have shaped the district. And so I feel like we have the process in place to do our work. We just need to be able to do our work in a way that makes sense, considering the decision is so significant for us all. Okay, thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to look at my colleagues to see if anybody has a committee report to share.
What is
Yeah.
we want to talk about the regulation under where we're going to talk about the
That's right.
regulation, Okay, then I'm good.
Okay, I did have a Horace Greeley Scholarship Fund liaison meeting, well, their board meeting, and I was the liaison to it, and it's the first one that I was able to go to. It was pretty straightforward. One thing I did want to highlight, and I really did appreciate about the organization, is they started every meeting with a letter from a recipient of the grant from the fund, the foundation. It's just, and then they read it, and that's how they open up every board meeting. And I thought that was really, really nice, just to kind of focus everybody again on although they're planning a lot of different things and they're doing a lot of different things, and there's lots of moving parts, that they sort of shift the focus back to, why are we all here? What are we doing here? Here's a letter. And that's how they conduct their meetings. So I really appreciated that. They talked about some of the upcoming events, and they have really pretty much all the dates for all of their major fundraisers. So I'm going to do a plug here. As you know, Spelling Bee, November 4th. Winter Ball, January 24th. The snow date will be January 26th. Spring Benefit, April 4th. And the Senior Musical, May 30, 31, and June 1st. I did want to also say, Christine, that I was on a team several years back. I've been in it, and we were the runner-ups, and ever since then, we've been downhill from there, and we are taking a sabbatical this year. So while I'll be there for a brief moment to just for support, I won't be participating. Yeah, we got some pretty neat gifts, and I did win the raffle one year too. Yeah. The other thing that I know that, they also mentioned, the senior musical, and I know that you're going to have a conversation with them about how that's going to work, because I know it's shifted last year from PTA being the ones that were organizing and to now the district is doing that. But I think from what I heard, and it's, I'm just relaying what I heard, I think there is still a desire to want it back. And it's not the scholarship fund that runs it, but they are the ones that are receiving the donation from the PTA, but now it's the school district. So just about that. And really, that's it. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. It's now time for public comment. We welcome public comments, and in respect for each other's time, we ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. Board members may be contacted via email or phone. After the public comment period has been completed, board members may have a discussion amongst themselves regarding comments presented. Are there any public comments tonight? Please identify yourself when you come up. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Roy Noy. I have 2 kids in here in Greeley. I just want to say that it's shameful that this year none of the district schools have a proper memorial for 9/11. There's no way that we can live in this country and not have all the kids in the auditorium listening from survivors, standing a minute of silence, saying something on whatever radio you have here in school is not sufficient. This is one of the most historical moments of this country in the recent years. And these kids should know every single thing about it. So that's one thing. And the other thing I want to say, the data you are showing here today, everything between 2019 to 2023 is affected by COVID-19. It's all not relevant. All these kids were at home, learning from home. It's not as they're in class sitting with a teacher. So go earlier and try to compare to earlier data.
Any other comments tonight? Okay. Now on to items 3, approvals and ratifications. We're going to do 3.1 first. So this is be resolved, the Board of Education accepts the minutes of the October 9th, 2024 board meeting. Can I have a motion for that? Can I have a second? Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Okay. 3.2 is the regulation that Dr. Ackerman discussed earlier. So we'll do a motion to take it up and then have a discussion about it, or we just don't even need to do that? Okay, so I guess, yeah, we'll just turn to our policy committee members to explain where we're at with that.
Hillary, do you want to say what you?
Sure. I guess I should turn this on. It feels so unnecessary with so few of us here, but I know that for the tape. So as Dr. Ackerman laid out in her report, we are shifting our thought process around this work to potentially being a regulation, which allows the districts a little more flexibility. And as a preliminary matter, as Dr. Ackerman mentioned, it's going to be emailed out again to the community in the week with an opportunity for further public comment back to us if people in the community want to give more feedback, especially as we're potentially shifting course. And we heard from some people that they didn't feel they had enough time to comment, so we are reopening up the comment. This is not something we're planning to rush or hoping to rush. We're just trying to work through it and work through what makes sense to be able to guide our administrators into how to properly align with both constitutional and New York State education law. So that, you know, in the interest of the why are we doing this, that is the why. And we, you know, we welcome feedback, and we certainly have been looking at all of it and considering it in our conversations. So is there anything else?
And we are, I think we are going to have further discussions on whether we think that we need to adopt this as a regulation, but we really don't we don't have anything, other regulations that we adopt besides the fee schedule. So probably not, but it's still up for discussion. We can talk about
Right,
that.
but the fact that, just to be clear, the fact that we wouldn't adopt it doesn't mean it wouldn't be a regulation, because the
Right.
superintendent
Right.
is, right, it's a semantics question on some level of whether we
Right.
adopt it or whether the superintendent implements it. But that's where our heads are at now, is that it may make more sense to do this, to approach this as a regulation, because it's really clarifying other policies versus do it as a standalone policy. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
I also think, like, we're trying to address three big things, really, at the high school, but we're trying to help everyone understand when things happen off campus, when we are required to intervene under DASA. We're trying to give our students guidance about appropriate assembly on campus. These are all based on things that happened last year. And we're also trying to give guidance around, you know, how to distribute publications on campus with permission, right? So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to outline that so there's real clarity around that for our students and our staff. It's for us. It's like our rule book, trying to make sure our rules are clear for everybody so that our kids and our staff and their rights are supported, and that they also know when we need to address missteps. And so that's what we're trying to do. So when we get to a place where we're ready, the plan would be for Sandy to send it to our high school kids and for me to send it to our staff. So we're all on the same page. We're trying to all get on the same page here, and we are responding to some needs that we identified last year. So that's where we are.
Any other board questions about that or topic? Yeah. Okay, super. Thank you.
All right. I recommend 4.1 instructional as presented.
I'll move that we accept the superintendent's recommendation for 4.1. Can I have a second?
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Recommend 4.2 non-instructional as presented.
I'll second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're on to the consent agenda now. This is items under number 5. The board may opt to use the consent agenda at its Board of Education meetings, which expedites routine items and allows the Board of Education more time to discuss other important issues. If a board member wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda for individual action, they must notify the district clerk, full board, and superintendent at least 24 hours in advance of the meeting so the agenda can be adjusted accordingly. It's recommended the Board of Education approve the following consent agenda as submitted by the superintendent. We have 5.1 through 5.12. It includes many of the things that we've already talked about today: Instagrants, ice hockey, electronic sign, a few other matters. And so I will make the motion for 5.1.
Brian,
Oh, sorry.
before you make the motion, I just have a few questions. I know when I first received the binder, and I know there was a backup memo on an FYI on, you know, it was highlighted in yellow, that consent agenda and reasons for why we have consent agenda has changed. The language has changed. And I just have a question about this because I want to know, I'd like to know who wrote this and did we get legal advice about this and who gave authority to do this, because I don't recall having a conversation about this.
I think if you recall in the board handbook that we approved, this was the language that was in there. And so this has been moved into the agendas to use going forward.
Well, I then, okay, thank you. So then I do have another question. Because the board is allowed under state law to take action at their business meeting, I just wonder if this sort of takes away the right for the board to take action on a resolution that's in the consent agenda. So if for example, if, we actually have one that got added, so if something comes up in the morning of the board meeting, and we want to take that for further discussion, so that we don't have to vote down the entire consent agenda, this would sort of curtail and take away that right for a board member or the board to do that. And so I'm not sure putting that 24 hours in advance of the meeting is appropriate. I also am not sure if that notifying the district clerk, the full board, and the superintendent, and then usually like when we want to remove something, it's because we want more information, we want further discussion, like that, like where else do we do that when a board member has to notify all these parties explaining basically why you want that sort of teeters into a dangerous zone on violating open meetings law, because if I said, I have nothing that I want to remove, obviously, but if I wanted to take out item 5 point whatever, and I need to notify, and I would like to give reasons why and have the discussion, but if that 5 point whatever wasn't on there, and then how do I do that, number one? And if I start doing that, then are we having the discussion outside of this meeting? So it just raises a lot of questions and just concerns around the board's ability to take action at a public meeting, because I don't want any of us to be put in a position where we would have to vote down the entire consent agenda where it's of routine matters, because let's say, and you can also have a discussion without obviously pulling something out.
Yeah.
But if after having the discussion, I decide that I need even further information or discussion from that point, then this negates me or anybody on the board from pulling it out because we didn't give that 24 hours notice in advance. So I think we should, if you have,
So what I'm following is what we as a group agreed to, using the handbook that we all approved and said that we would operate by.
no, using the handbook, the handbook, though, I don't remember talking about this specific language like this.
Oh, well, I don't know. We can
Yeah,
refer to it, but
Am I the only one? Everybody remembers this whole 24 hours in notice in
Yeah.
terms of consent agenda, because,
part of our no surprises kind of philosophy that we're trying to.
right, but
propagate.
I think everybody is, and then part of the things that we also talked about was board norms in terms of like intent, right? And
Yeah.
I don't think you had ill intent to put this here, obviously.
No, I'm
So
following what we agreed to. Yeah.
It's just, maybe I didn't pick it up when we were having that discussion at the
Okay.
retreat or when we were looking at the handbook. But I don't know, and it just feels a little weird to me about not having the ability, the board not having the ability, because then I guess we need to revisit the whole consent agenda idea altogether, because then what becomes, it says, Board of Education more time to discuss other important issues, like, so what's more important and what's not, and what becomes routine matters and what is not. And that's not something that we sit and talk about. Like, I'm not part of that discussion. So I don't know. I would just like to revisit that again because this doesn't feel right to me. I would actually like to have a discussion and get advice from council
I mean, we did have
about it.
council review the handbook, just so everybody knows. And would
And that's
have-
fine,
would
but
have-
again,
would have weighed in.
but this is very specific, so.
Okay,
I think it's different to say, like, okay, you approve the contract. There are things that we do that we might not catch at that very moment or think about at that very instance, but then you revisit it and you look at it again and you go, oh, this doesn't look or feel right in this situation. And I think that's okay.
My suggestion, I'd be curious to hear if anybody else is in those situations when you're preparing for the meeting to voice which ones you might have something that could occur to you so that we take them out beforehand. I think that's the point, to help the staff be able to prepare,
Right.
have the discussion.
But I think when something goes on the agenda, to be fair, that every staff member should be prepared to talk about any item on the agenda, whether I have a question or not, or I give 24 hours, 36 hours, 48-hour notice, because I have to tell you that, as everybody knows, I forgot to mention during committee reports, I was lucky enough to go to the New York State School Boards Association convention for 3 days. So I'm not really looking at this week's binder and agenda items very carefully until maybe later on. This is also, as you know, and everybody knows, this is a volunteer position. This is not something that I might be looking at. We get it Friday afternoon, we have the meetings on Wednesday. If I have things that I need to do between the weekend and Monday and Tuesday are taken over by other competing priorities that everybody has, I might not have that ability. I think it's safe to say, and I'll ask the administration because they're all sitting here, that I think everybody understands that when the board asks a question, that nobody's trying to play that gotcha game. So I think to say that no surprise thing is obviously, right? But I just am not comfortable with the language that it is written. I think the previous language was better. I think the way it's written here, I think it does prohibit boards to take action during the meeting. And I think that could be very problematic.
Okay, well, I'm not suggesting that we change it for tonight. You don't have an item that you want to remove or
No.
ask about tonight, so how about?
No, I can ask about, we can have discussions, but I don't have anything that I want to remove.
Right.
Okay.
By approving this consent agenda, that doesn't mean that we can't revisit the words that are
Of course.
introducing the consent agenda.
Yeah, that's
or
essentially
letter
what I
of
was
it,
going to
right.
move to next, Matt. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
A couple things. So we did the board handbook with David in a work session present. So what I'm hearing is an adjustment may need to be made to the board handbook. So I can schedule a meeting for you guys to sit down and talk about that, because it's in the handbook, right?
Yeah.
So this is supposed to be the guiding document we're all operating by, and so now, as it's in motion,
Yeah.
if we need to make an adjustment, because it's been adopted by resolution, right? You've adopted it. And so we can maybe have a conversation around it again, make an adjustment, and then you'd have to re-adopt it,
Yeah.
right? So I can work,
Well, yeah,
right?
no, so that's fine. I think, but it's just to put this out there is that when we adopt the handbook by resolution, it's a handbook, it's a guidance, and yes, we sat with legal counsel to do that. But I don't think that if it's then going to be implemented, folded into the agenda in a certain way, I would also like to sort of, hey, remember, this is what we had. And
Yeah, that's why I asked the team to highlight it so people would be sure to not blow by it in the prep. So that's one of the reasons it came to everybody in yellow, because I wanted to make sure everybody was not going to be surprised that the language was going to change.
To Kaylee's point, there was sometimes things added on within the 24-hour window. So I guess it's confusing if you did have an issue with something that's added on later on, how we would go ahead and take that out with the
Sure.
language.
I think we wouldn't put that under consent anymore.
That's another way to
I
handle
think
it.
that's what probably we should do, but I hear there is a concern about the board handbook, right? And how it's translating to the agenda, and this has been adopted. And so what we should do is we should sit down and talk about whether or not we need to make an adjustment to the board handbook and then approve that adjustment by resolution.
And then it would change for the
At
subsequent
any-
meeting.
Listen, you
Yeah.
can make a
Makes sense.
just because it has this here, you can make a motion to take anything off. It just, would the board support the motion based on the handbook? That's really the conversation. So let's just talk about what the problem is to see if we can, this is just my recommendation. I'll schedule a meeting for you to do that with David, Kaylee, if that's what you'd like David Shaw there.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so for tonight, we're going to keep going, and I'm going to propose 5.1 through 5.12. I'll be the person to make that motion. Is there a second?
I will second.
Is there any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Nothing for 6 or 7 tonight, so under 8, financials.
Wait, Lisa, where's the contract for 6? Okay. All right, thank you.
Right, that was the one
Yeah,
that I
that's
was
the one
saying
that
was,
got added, and
was
that's
added to the consent agenda.
Okay.
Right, so that's
All
the
right.
kind of thing where in the future, we probably need to not do it that way. Yeah. Where was I? Number 8. So we're acknowledging receipt of 4 items. Let me read them off, and we can take 8.1 through 8.4 together, I hope. We're going to acknowledge receipt of the extra classroom activity funds for September 24. Acknowledge receipt of the treasurer's report for September 2024, receipt of the appropriation status report for September 2024, and receipt of the revenue status report for September 2024. So can I have a motion for 8.1 through 8.4?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, notice of future meetings. The next time we'll be together will be Wednesday, November 13th, 2024. We're going to start a little earlier because we're going to have representatives from Northern Westchester Hospital here. So we'll start at 6 o'clock with that work session, and then the regular public meeting will start at 7. And then we'll be here again for and that one also, that I should say, also has the elementary school presentation in it. And then December 11th at 7, the middle school program. Can I have a motion to adjourn at 8:55?
I move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.